We're doing more. But of course, doing hinders being. And one thing I had to realize, and it wasn't even that long ago, is I had to stop doing in order to start being.
You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. Coming up today on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about what nourishing activities she can fill her empty life with after decluttering. We're going to talk about some quiet spaces, some things that TK and I do with our downtime. But another listener has a question about her struggles with wanting high-end products, even though she's a minimalist. Then we've got our lightning round question, a FAMS question, and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full 2-hour Maximal edition of episode 429, where we answer 5 times the questions, and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because sing along at home, advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Victoria.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm calling from Washington, D.C., and I'm a Patreon subscriber. I love your books, love your documentaries, love your podcast, and I listen to everything. So my question is, what do you fill your time with? I know, Josh, that you don't have home internet or TV. So I know you mentioned you read a lot, you write every day, you record the podcast, you spend a lot of time outdoors. But how do you fill your downtime when you are not using home internet or, shopping or spending money? So my question is, what do you do with all of those empty hours that you find yourself with? Thanks.
TK, this is such an important question, but it's probably not important for the reasons you might think it is important. I can answer it practically. It is true that in my own personal space, I don't have home internet or a TV. Now, my wife has home internet and a TV in the shared space that we have, but in my own space, I find those things to be a bit of a distraction for me, but I don't think they're evil or bad. The reason I think this is an important question, though, is because it presupposes that one should fill their downtime or free time with activities, with more. And man, that resonates with me so deeply. And it troubles me so deeply because I feel exactly the way Victoria feels. What should I do with this free time? I'd like to start with an analogy. And I've got so much to say about this, so let's go back and forth here. But the analogy is about an empty room. When you move into a new house, we feel compelled to fill an empty room with stuff. Now, nothing wrong with that. But what should I fill this room with? Everyone knows that one has to have a couch in their living room. You must have a coffee table. You must have a TV. You must have internet. And in your kitchen, your dining room, you must have a dining table with 6 chairs. And in your garage, you must have a certain number of shelves that store your tools and all of the quote unquote essentials. We must fill the room. We must fill the space with stuff. And the same thing happens to be true with our downtime. And do you remember not that long ago, TK, when you would stop at a red light, you just had nothing to do. It was true downtime. But now when we stop at a red light, what happens? I need to fill this time with screen time. I need to fill this time with something. And that's why this is an important question, because we're constantly filling our lives with more stuff, more obligations, more screen time. We're filling our lives in a way that is distracting us from what is actually meaningful. We're getting rid of the quiet life. We're getting rid of quiet time. We're getting rid of solitude. We're doing more. But of course, doing hinders being. And one thing I had to realize, and it wasn't even that long ago, is I had to stop doing in order to start being. You can't do silence. You can't do quiet. And yet we try to. What must I do with this quiet time? But that doing often interrupts the being. But of course, peace arises the moment you realize there is nothing that must be done in this moment. There are infinite possibilities. There's a lot of things I could do right now. But what I've learned is that stillness, when I actually embrace stillness, it's uncomfortable. But that stillness pasteurizes the chaos in my mind.
You know, when you talk about the screens, I think about how I just got off an airplane and there's a screen in front of me the entire time, and I had pretty limited control over my ability to turn it off for at least about the first 20 minutes of the plane ride. Several of the people around me were trying to turn theirs off, and it wasn't just me. You just didn't have the power to turn it off. My suspicion is that someone paid for that time, and they are obligated to let whatever the advertisements are play. I don't know, but all I know is that I had the screen in front of me and I couldn't be without it. When I go to pump gas, most of the time there's a screen that's there playing something for me, and the speakers are so loud that I am definitely going to hear whatever is being blasted out at me. Average bathroom now. You go into the bathroom and as a guy, you're standing in front of a urinal and like, there you go. You got a TV show to watch because God forbid that for this 10 to 20 seconds, you be without something to look at. And sometimes, like people have their phones out as they're going. And it's just, we are so inundated with having something to fill up our time that it gives rise to these questions like, hey, if that were all taken away, what would we fill it up with? Because we live in a culture that treats time as something to be filled up, space as something to be filled up. And history can be a great teacher here because we could ask, well, what did human beings do for the overwhelming majority of history? Because this business of having a bunch of screens that we can use to stimulate ourselves is a pretty recent phenomenon. Most people didn't have that. What did they do? Well, they looked each other in the eyes. They spoke to each other and listened to each other. They sat alone with themselves and they paid attention to what came up for them. They engaged in meaningful, productive work, not necessarily because they got paid for it, although that was a thing too, but also because they enjoyed working with their hands or building things for other people. Hobbies were a big thing, and being an amateur was respected. At that time, it was true to its etymological roots. It meant to love. It didn't mean to be a hack, to be a second-rate person who has not figured out a way to do the really important thing, which is to monetize it. And so there are a lot of things that we can do with that time, but I think the notion of filling it up, the notion of it being full as some kind of default is the sort of assumption that we want to challenge. One of the themes we talk about a lot on this show is that as long as you're clinging to the familiar, you make yourself unavailable to the possibility of something new. And when we cling to familiar things like, well, I keep the TV on and I keep the cell phone on because if I ever get bored, then I know that I got something to do. Well, there might be all sorts of amazing possibilities and creative ideas and interesting relationships that are knocking at your door, but you can't hear them because of the noise. And if you're willing to take the risk of saying, you know what? I can survive a little bit by not having some instant gratification by way of checking phone notifications and watching TV programs. Why don't I flirt with the silence, flirt with the stillness, flirt with the space, flirt with the free time to see if there's something here worth dating, worth engaging at a deeper level and worth becoming one with in a way that transcends life as I've known it.
I love that you're talking about a sort of reframing there, flirting with the quiet time. Maybe it's not downtime that needs to be filled. Maybe it's already filled with silence. Maybe it's already filled with peace. Maybe it's already filled with tranquility. Doesn't mean that it's boredom. In fact, you can reframe that. That's the thing we're so afraid of. We're afraid of being bored. So we stop at the red light and we reach for the phone because what's going on out there, as opposed to what's going on in here, in my heart, in my mind. And yes, that is a bit uncomfortable, especially at first, because we're so accustomed to what? Seeking pleasure. That pleasure seeking becomes a problem because as we seek out pleasure, we continue to seek out more and more and more. We up our threshold repeatedly. That's the reason that hedonism doesn't work on a long enough timeline, because we get everything we thought we wanted and it ceases to be what we want right now. And so we discard it and we get the next thing. And so we seek out what? We seek out the things that are supposed to make us happy. Well, here's a thought for you. How many things have you purchased that were going to make you happy? Where are those things now? How many things have you done, accomplished, and those accomplishments were going to make you happy? But did they? And did it last? You know what does last, though? The stillness, the silence that's underneath it all. A great friend of mine once told me that he speaks only when speaking will add more value than silence. And I aspire toward the quiet life. I value the quiet. Now, my behaviors don't always match that. And it is true. I can give you some examples of things that I do. And Victoria mentioned a few of them. I write every day. I read every day. I do both of those things really slowly, by the way. Not by choice necessarily, but that is my regular pace. I'm a really slow reader. And I exercise every day as well. But those things aren't so much about the doing. It's just I feel so compelled to do those things that the doing is a byproduct of being compelled by them. Where I go wrong, however, is when I seek out the things that I should be doing. And that's why I hesitate to even talk about, yes, I write every day, I exercise every day, I read every day, because it's going to be easy for someone listening to this to prescriptionize that and think, oh, you know what? The right thing to do is get rid of my TV and get rid of my internet and read and write and exercise every day. For some people, that might work. For other people, they might feel like, oh, I've been forced to do these things. Remember back in school when they forced a book onto you? You must read this book.
Yeah.
You felt far less compelled to read it than if you were to seek that out on your own. It'd be much more compelling if you pick it up off the shelf yourself and say, oh, wow, what is this?
Yeah. You know, one area where I do relate to Victoria, though, is sometimes it does help me to get a picture of what it might look like to live a certain kind of life, especially if something is new to me. So when you think about the way people learn language, we learn language by hearing other people say specific words and sentences in that language. And although we might use different words or we might articulate different thoughts than the people we're learning from, we need specific examples to help build our vocabulary. And so it is with other aspects of life. If I'm trying to live more simply and my life has been filled with all kinds of clutter, it can be helpful for me to build my vocabulary by asking someone else, like, hey, man, what does it look like for you when you got rid of your TV? What does a life look like for you when you're not on your phone 5 hours a day scrolling? Maybe that's the only life that I know. Or things that I've asked you before, like, how do you do it without fast food? How do you do it when you get hungry and you live in a world where you can pull over at a drive-thru and satiate your hunger just like that? When you start saying no to that, what do? Well, you might have to spend more time on prep. Well, this part gets harder, but here's a way to make it easier. And so that kind of prescription stuff can be helpful as long as you don't follow it like a rule, but you treat it as a sort of jump start to catalyze your own creative thinking around ways that you can play the game. For me, that's taking walks, that's playing board games, playing card games, engaging in conversation. If I ever find myself, I typically don't feel bored, but if I ever find myself in that type of situation, I think of all the people that I always say, like, I wish I should talk to them more. I wish I could talk to them more. Let me call my aunt, who would be glad to hear from me that I haven't talked to in a long time, and check on her, see how she's doing. There's always something to fill the time up with, but you get a better feel for what those things are when you're not looking at time as a problem to solve, but as the gift of life itself. And you think about how to engage these things with intentionality based on what you value, not on what our compulsive society says you gotta do in order to be normal.
I agree with you that often when we see those templates from someone else's life, it can be instructive as long as it doesn't become didactic. You should do it this way.
Yeah.
But if I see TK likes to go on long walks, yeah, I like that. That fits into my life. As soon as I hear board games, I check out immediately. That's not for me. But that's not an indictment on your playing of board games. I just know that's not something that I personally enjoy. And so when you see these different recipes, it's about adjusting the recipe for taste for you as opposed to blindly following the recipe. Yeah. You're like, oh yeah, I really hate the way that black pepper tastes, but this recipe calls for black pepper, so I guess I have to put black pepper in the recipe. No, you don't. The question that is compelling then is, what do I say no to from someone else's recipe? And in fact, what can I let go of is a much more powerful question than what can I do? And in those moments of boredom or downtime, right? I'm asking myself, what can I let go of here as opposed to what should I do? I think there's one other component here that I want to touch on before we move on. And there is a great deal of emotion, especially now in a world that is bombarded with stimuli. There's quite a bit of emotion associated with silence. And it's quite often what we would call negative emotions or just unpleasant emotions.
Yeah.
When we remove ourselves from the world in that way, when we put our phone in our trunk for an hour, when we disconnect the internet, when we cease to participate in the cultural conversation of the moment, there's a stillness or a silence there that is uncomfortable. And it begins to bring up all of these emotions. TK, you just released a book called Emotional Clutter. People can download it for free over at theminimalists.com/emotional clutter. Professor Sean will put a link to that in the show notes as well. There's an audiobook version as well, which I really enjoyed recording with you. But in that book, you talk about many of these unpleasant or negative emotions that arise in these moments of change.
That's right. We often make our emotions the enemy. And when you see an enemy, you defend yourself against them or you run in the opposite direction. But when you can learn to see your feelings as friends, which sometimes mean that they convey messages that you perhaps don't want to hear, but that you need to hear, or they say things that aren't necessarily fun or funny, but are very important and crucial to your journey, it changes the relationship you have to them. And one of the things we talk about a lot in Emotional Clutter is not so much getting rid of emotions, but reframing the experience of emotion altogether so that the energy that they produce in your life is a congruent energy, a creative energy that moves you forward. And, when I think about this, one of the negative emotions that often comes up, or I'll call it uncomfortable emotions with silence, is awkwardness. And one great example of this is sort of like the TV movie depiction of the first date. You got someone that you like and you're sitting across each other at a coffee shop or a restaurant and you don't have anything to say. And you're like, the food's good. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah, this is a nice place, isn't it? We all know that scene. We've all seen it before. It's like you just want to get up and run out, right? Because you're scared and you wish you had a good question and you wish you had something interesting to say. And oh my gosh, this person's going to think I'm crazy. They're never going to like me because I don't have words. How fragile must our world be when everything has to be held together by constantly possessing words for every thought, every feeling, every moment? But what if we saw that awkwardness as just a story that we've learned to tell ourselves about this thing that we call silence? Why should you always have something to say? Who says that on a first date it has to be filled with words? Who says silence can't be magical? Who says the only way to communicate with that other person in a non-stalkerish way is words? You can be present and you can be silent and you can not have anything to say. You don't have to stare them down. You can check out the space that you're in. You can listen to the music that's playing. You can feel the vibe.
And we all know that's true because we all have someone in our life, whether it is a significant other or a sibling or a best friend, someone you enjoy. I think about Nicodemus. He and I can go on a long road trip together and spend 2 or 3 hours without saying a word to each other, maybe even longer. And it's not awkward silence, it's just silence. Awkward is the story I'm telling myself because I'm setting an expectation up that I should be filling this space with something. I should be filling this empty room with some stuff. I should be filling this silence with conversation. There's nothing wrong with stuff. There's nothing wrong with conversation until it gets in the way of your peace. Victoria, let's send you a copy of the audiobook version of Emotional Clutter. I really enjoyed recording this with you, TK. You have such a great audiobook voice, and the way that you performed on this audiobook, and then we recorded these little mini podcast conversations between each chapter, man, you did such an awesome job with Emotional Clutter. I'm excited to get this out into the world. theminimalists.com/emotional clutter if you want to check that out. From Alabama, let's move on to some social media questions. Our first social media question today is from Facebook. Cecilia's got something for us.
Living as a minimalist has come natural to me, but lately I've found myself wanting a new car and a little bit of high-end jewelry. Why do I struggle with the idea of wanting lovely things and being a minimalist?
This is a paradox for me, TK, because I think the most lovely things are often minimalist in nature. Minimalism is beautiful to me because the bones are the beauty. When I see a really beautiful minimalist space, it can be high-end. I think of it as simple luxury. When you go to a beautiful space and even a beautiful retail store, I don't know if you've ever been to one of the James Pierce retail stores. He's a clothing store. He sells basic essential clothing, pants and shirts, but he creates a whole experience, and it's a beautiful space, but it is aggressively simple. It doesn't have too much. It also doesn't have too little. And I think that's important. And so you might be at a point right now, Cecilia, where you have too little and you want to show off your personality. You want to show certain parts of yourself that you're currently not able to express with your current possessions or resources that you might have, including your car. However, if your desires are not actually your desires, that means they were handed to you by someone else. And quite often that's what happens. It's the reason that we don't want to do advertisements on a show like this, because I don't want to create a new desire in you because a corporation paid me to make you feel inadequate. And so the question I have to ask myself is, will that high-end jewelry enhance your life? Maybe. You get to decide. And then you get to ask yourself some questions. We've got these 6 questions you can ask before you buy something. It's a wallpaper you can put on your phone. Just go to theminimalists.com/before. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. But what you can do is you ask yourself some of these questions. Is this the best use of this money? Maybe I want this really nice ring or nice bracelet. Okay. It's art. It's jewelry. It can be beautiful. Is that the best use of this money? Will this actually add value to my life? Is this something I desire, or is it a mimetic desire? Is someone else desiring this for me, and then they're imposing their desires on me? Whether that's a corporation, or more likely it's someone from our peer group because they think the jewelry or the car looks good and is impressive. And of course, I want to impress the people closest to me. One of the most impressive things to me, however, is always the person who doesn't need those things for validation. I know plenty of people who wear really nice jewelry or nice clothing and they're real fashionable. But the people who are most impressive, even from that group, are the people who aren't trying to impress me.
That's right. You know, buying decisions aren't made in the abstract. There's always an element of comparison, and prices in some sense represent that. We all know the experience of saying things like, hey man, I like that pair of shoes, but not for $300. I like that jacket, not for $500. That's a beautiful home, not for me at $5 million, right? Because I like is an abstract statement. There's no cost to liking anything. But once you put a price tag on that I like, it contextualizes it in a way that makes you think about it in terms of a trade-off. We've often quoted Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And so when I think about budgets, I think about budgets in terms of the fact that we're all finite. So we only have a finite quantity of money. We only have a finite amount of time, a finite amount of energy, a finite ability to pay attention to a finite number of things. And none of us can be 2 places or 3 places at the same time. And so when you're making decisions, asking yourself, is it in the budget, means a lot more than can I afford it in the abstract. It means given the fact that a trade-off will have to be made, that I will have to make myself a little less available to something else in order to become available to that I will have to put at risk my ability to buy, do, or have something else in order to have that, then you actually give yourself the freedom to do whatever you want within the budget without condemning yourself, but also you secure for yourself the ability to think critically about how important that is to you. So if you want that necklace, there's no one outside yourself who can tell you if that's a good choice. But just remind yourself that there's a trade-off, that the moment you purchase that necklace, you're becoming a little less available to something else, and you're putting at risk your ability to buy something else. And if you can look at that something else and go, yeah, at the level of priority, I think this is the thing that's going to move the needle in my life, then you're good. It just so happens to be the case that for many of us, that's not the thing that moves the needle in our lives. And unfortunately, we often find out after the purchase is made and we're spending years working off the debt that we accumulated by doing that. As long as you do that critical thinking beforehand, you'll know what's best for you.
I think it's also important to remember what we were talking about with the first question. You yourself are complete in an empty room, but then don't interpret that as, well, I guess I don't need anything ever because I'm already complete. You are complete. The question then is, what's going to augment my life? What experiences, what relationships, what creative endeavors, what career or vocation or profession is going to augment my life? But then also, what material possessions are going to enhance my life? What's going to bring in beauty? Because as we talked about with Erwin McManus, beauty is essential. Now, we don't want to just heap beauty onto our lives at the exclusion of the deeper, more fulfilling things. But that's why minimalism is so appealing to me. Because we do get down to the bones are the beauty. Doesn't mean living with nothing. It means living with that which is essential plus that which enhances my life in some meaningful way. Welcome back, y'all. Malabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer your questions from TikTok.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalists on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, Threads, any of these other platforms. We are at The Minimalists on the socials. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds, TK, to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We call them minimal maxims. Professor Sean puts those minimal maxims in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast. So you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you'd like. And by the way, you can find all of our minimal maxims in one place. It's so simple. Just go to minimalmaxims.com, and every time you refresh it, a brand new minimal maxim will populate on your screen. And every week we'll send you our minimal maxims right there in your inbox along with the show notes. Each week we send 5, 10, 15 minimal maxims to you on Monday in one email. Don't worry, we don't clutter your inbox, right? We don't send you spam. We don't send you junk. We don't send you advertisements. We will send you our show notes and our minimal maxims at the beginning of each week if you're on our email list over at theminimalists.email. It looks like Pepper has a question for us.
I like the structure behind your letting go process, but can you talk about your process for letting go of the emotions that are tied to the things?
It's interesting. So the letting go process, just as a review, real simple. If I want to get rid of something and I can sell it, I try to sell it. If I can't sell it in 7 days, I lower the price. If I can't sell it in 30 days, I donate it. And if I can't donate it, I recycle it. If I can't recycle it, then I trash it. And I do the same thing with emotions. I try to recycle my emotions and donate my emotions. Oh, that's one of the worst things, isn't it?
Donating your emotions?
Yes. Isn't that what happens though? You get around someone who's real sad, they donate that sadness to you, right? I know that happens to me quite a bit when I get around someone who's real joyous, and it's like infectious. It's contagious. Like, that joy can be contagious. And so in a weird way, I guess that is kind of what happens. Although it doesn't get rid of my emotion. It almost amplifies my emotion. If I'm joyous and then you're joyous, and before we know it, we're manic and we're exhausted after an hour of conversation, especially TK and I, since we're both introverts. Spend an hour together, 2 hours together. And at the end of it, we're like, whew, all right.
We were like, I had enough of this guy. I hope I never see him again until the next episode.
See you next week.
Let's get 60 seconds on the clock, TK. What do you guys, something pithy for us?
Yeah, our feelings are teachers to be engaged, not demons to be exercised. We have these unpleasant emotional experiences, and we treat those feelings as if they are evil spirits to be cast out, and we seek out the psychological priest, hoping that they can sprinkle some holy water over the soul and get that anger out of us, get that jealousy out of us. And we're so busy trying to get rid of it, push it out, that we never take the time to sit with it, to walk with it, to listen to it and learn from it and become wiser. And, my process for letting go, it's of feelings. It's like my process for letting go of my teachers. I don't. I keep them around for as long as I can. Some of my teachers come, some of them go. None of them are with me for a lifetime because everything comes to an end. But I try to learn from them as long as I have them. It's like that scene in the movie Avatar near the end of the movie where everything is going to hell and the main protagonist is just in a deep sleep and everybody needs this guy to wake up, wake up. That's what our feelings are there for, to wake us up, to remind us that we are alive. Hey, wake up. I know I don't feel pleasant right now, but there's something you need to think about, something you need to process. There's something you need to ask. You need to wake up to your humanity, wake up to the power of your vulnerability, wake up to your capacity to love and to listen. You got to wake up to what you really want for you. Wake up to your need to stand up for yourself. Wake up. You don't want to get rid of those friends. You don't want to get rid of those allies. They're messengers there to teach you something. And when you listen, it begins to transform the experience.
How do you let go of the emotions that are tied to things? You simply stop clinging. Letting go is not something you do. It is something you stop doing. You stop clinging to those emotions. And all of a sudden, they begin to disappear. This too shall pass, right? And all of a sudden, that sadness that I felt yesterday, I don't feel it today. The problem is we start to cling to these so-called negative emotions because they give us a sense of certainty. Every negative emotion that you experience, it points toward your biggest fear. And that fear is, I am not enough. Which is the biggest lie you've ever been told. When you cling to a negative emotion, what you're clinging to is that story. I am not enough. We don't need to pathologize those negative emotions. It's not bad to feel sad. It's not bad to feel angry. It's not bad to feel disappointed. It's not bad to feel upset. It's not bad to feel grief. In fact, there's an appropriate time for all of those things. But when I hold on to them really tightly because they give me that sense of certainty, I am enough, but only with all of these negative emotions that I cling to, well, then we don't make room for the positive emotions, for the pleasant emotions that are the other side of that emotional coin.
Yeah, imagine me giving you a box and saying, "Hey, Josh, I got this box here. How do I let this go?" The first question to ask is, well, what is it? Because if that's a car battery inside that box, then the answer to the question might differ from if it's a bunch of cash, right? Knowing
Just
what
hand it to me.
Easy solution.
Well, you might want to ask, where did it come from and why are you trying to let it go?
Questions,
Right?
no questions.
No questions.
We'll just take $5 to sign up for our Patreon.
Wasn't there some deal you made with Ryan like that? I forget. There's like a no question deal that you guys have.
I'm trying to think of this. So,
there's some type of like
scenario. So you are mistaking Ryan and I for a scene from the movie The Town.
Yes.
Starring Ben Affleck.
Yes.
And the guy with the forearms, Jeremy Renner. And there's a moment in there where Ben Affleck walks in the room. He's like, I really need you he goes, we're going somewhere. We're going to hurt some people. And you can't ask me any questions ever. And he goes, okay, whose car are we taking?
But that sounds like something Ryan would say.
Yes, absolutely. He would definitely be the guy like, all right, whose car are we taking?
No questions.
Who was that? Ben Affleck
and Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, I always confuse you and Ryan with those two guys.
It's understandable. It's the forearms mostly.
But like the point of this analogy is, hey, look, there's no one way to get rid of everything, right? And a part of knowing how to let go of something involves identifying what it is. And that means taking time to unwrap it, taking time to unpack it, unbox it, and look at it and be present with it long enough to say, okay, this is cash. The way we need to think about letting go of this is different. This is a car battery. The rules regarding how and where and when we let this go is also different. It's the same thing with anything going on in your interior life. It's like, you should look at it first and unpack it first, unwrap it first, and be present with it long enough to know what it is. What it is, not merely in terms of what words can I use to describe it, like this is anger, this is sadness, this is jealousy, but what it is in the sense of what it means to me. Why am I feeling that? And what are my stories around that? And it's that process of unpacking it that gives you the wisdom to know what to do with it and what to hang on to.
I got another question here for you in a moment. But first, real quick, for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. TK, I love what you did with the Minimalism Life podcast. So for those of you who don't know, we have this little side project. It's called Minimalism Life. You can check it out at minimalism.com, which, by the way, beautiful site redesign that should be implemented by the time this episode comes out. Stunning website, aggressively minimalist. Minimalism.com. It's the best in minimalist design and art and travel and well-being and intentional living, minimalist lifestyle. And you can check out all of the archives over there. But we also have this little micro podcast called the Minimalism Life Podcast. We'll put a link to both of these in the show notes. And for the last couple years, once a month, I've been publishing an episode there. And they're usually 3 to 5 minutes long. I'll read something and then I'll provide some additional commentary about something that I've written about letting go or about different insights that I've had. And TK just started doing these episodes on his own as well. And the first one you did is about how the experts are all right and the experts are all wrong. And I won't spoil it, but I'll encourage you to go listen to it. It's about a 5-minute episode. And I just get such joy from listening to that because you always give me these different perspectives, and doing it in these bite-sized chunks is a beautiful way to celebrate that wisdom. I can play it for 5 minutes and I walk away with 1 or 2 or 3 things that have added value to my life in this attenuated time frame. So bravo, plenty more of those episodes to come as well. Minimalism.com. It's the Minimalism Life podcast. You can check out all of my archives over there. And of of course, TK is doing the new season there at Minimalism Life. Let's move on over to FAMS, the Friday afternoon Minimalist Zoom. Every month, the first Friday of each month, we do a Zoom call with our lovely Patreon subscribers. And Alabama's there in the chat. She's collecting your additional questions that we don't get to in that Zoom call. You can turn your camera on. We interact with you. It's like having a live event or just having a simple Zoom call with the Minimalist. Or you turn your camera off, turn your mic off, and just be a fly on the wall. You can witness the conversations, the joy, the laughter, the tears that happen on these Friday afternoon Minimalist Zooms. Alabama, Sarah had a question for us.
Can owning things deprive you of the joy of sharing them? For example, if you buy home workout equipment, does that keep you from potentially connecting with a community at a gym?
Rob Bell has this great chapter in a book that came out in 2009. The book is called Drops Like Stars. And in that chapter, I read it at our most recent Sunday symposium that we did, the live event that we did. By the way, we're on tour right now, theminimalists.com/tour. Free tour stops, 7 of them, all across California. People coming from all over the world to these events. You can check those out if there are still some tickets left. theminimalists.com for all the details there. But when we did the most recent Sunday Symposium live event, I read something from that book, and he talks about there's a difference between owning a thing and possessing a thing. And he gives a few examples. The example I absolutely love from the book is, he says, I've got this guitar, and he describes the guitar and all the pedals and the strings and the brand and the guitar. He describes it. He owns that guitar. And he has a friend, though, Jeff, who comes over to his house from time to time. And Jeff takes that guitar off the wall, and he possesses that guitar. No, he doesn't own it, but he's able to possess it. And you've heard me talk about there's a difference between ownership and access to a thing, but what Rob Bell illuminates there is there's a real difference. It's possible to own something and cling to it really tightly, and you don't get any joy from it, and no one else gets joy from it as well. It's also possible to possess something, to possess that guitar. Rob said he does things with that guitar I couldn't even imagine doing. I own it, but he possesses it.
Wow. That's fascinating, man. That's awesome. There's so much more than the things we own. And that kind of illustrates in this really beautiful way just how it's us who gives definition to the stuff rather than the other way around. That's the fundamental difference between consumerism and creativity. Consumerism says you are what you own, and what you own is what gives meaning to your life. Whereas creativity says, I am the capacity to impact my world. I am the capacity to negotiate possibility. I am the capacity to bring forth what has not yet been, and I give meaning to the things that I own and to the things around me. To this question, I think it's interesting because on one end, that is certainly true in a very cool way. One of the things you know is that before I come here, there's a monastery that I go to spend a little time in it, but they recently closed. And so it's no longer open to the public. And I went on the last day, and there's a guy who works in the gift shop, and I went in there to say goodbye to him. And the gift shop is mostly empty. There's nothing really there. And I make some comment about how, I wish they had like some books or something like that. And he kind of looks around and he's like, come with me. And this monastery is all empty now. It's been like a couple of years since any nuns have been there. And he walks me around and we go through all these different contours and we end up in a library. And he says, I'm going to have to, figure out what happens with all of this. He goes, but whatever you want. And I say, you mean you'll sell me some of the books in here? He goes, no. He goes, take what you want.
Oh, my stars.
And he's like, you got 2 minutes.
This is
just won the Price is Right, and it's just like running down.
Supermarket sweep? Where they gave them the carts and they got to go around the grocery store for 2 minutes.
That's
and just
exactly what that is.
Oh, Michelle had to be furious.
She's with me.
Oh. She's holding you down.
And the first thing I do, I'm not kidding you, is I laugh and I say there is no person on this planet who's more likely to be in this situation. I'm in an episode of The Twilight Zone right now. I'm in the middle of a Catholic library that's so vast, shelves and shelves of books by section. My wife is right here too. And I can have as much as I want. And I also have 2 minutes to make my decisions. So the first thing I say to myself is, leave some for somebody else. That's the first thing I say. And I go, be realistic and be fair. Don't just hoard. And so I stayed honest to that. I got 7 books and my wife was cool. The first thing I do is I go to the section on Mary, and then I go to the section on history. And here's what's cool is as I'm scanning the shelves, I see a few things on my wish list, a couple of things that are really expensive, a couple of things that are rare finds, and I get them and I'm like, all right, I'm ready, and I get the books that I wanted. But one of the things I was telling Michelle when we left is, man, can you imagine how meaningless of an offer that would have been if I were a billionaire whose house had a full library with every book on my wish list? I wouldn't have needed that guy, and I wouldn't have even seen the magic of the moment. But that moment was so magical. I just went to say goodbye to a guy that I liked. I made an offhand comment about books, and he took me into a part of this monastery that I had never seen before, which was really cool because he's taking me through all these different contours. And I'm like, I think I just listened to a true crime where some guy was being taken in a place like this. Like, am I about to die? Like, it was a magical experience. It was crazy. I got a chance to see this big library and everything about it was so meaningful. And sometimes when you don't have everything that you want and you can't get everything you want on your own, it provides you with the gift that is connecting with, collaborating with other people. We always want to be the power player. We always want to be the giver. Everybody has a dream of being more generous. None of us dream of being the person who is the recipient of such generosity, And one of the most beautiful aspects of being human is letting other people feed into us, letting other people do nice things for us, and the connection, the moments that we get to have with each other. And so that is one of the beautiful possibilities that gets opened up when you're not hoarding and you're not dependent upon yourself for everything. You get to be honest and say, I can't meet all of my needs. I need other people. At the same time, I don't think that we should live in fear of not getting those experiences. If there's something that you're better off owning because that's more convenient for you and that's right for you, I don't think it's healthy to say, oh, it's a bad thing for me to own stuff because it's going to take away the magic from my life. I think there are pros and cons with everything, and you don't make decisions by trying to predict which ones will lead to magic because the magic comes from living in alignment with your values.
And so to go back to Sarah's question directly, just to wrap this up really quickly, what I've understood is that ownership can be great or it can be a burden.
Yeah.
Access can be great, right? And so if you own something, you certainly have access to it, or I suspect you have access to it. But if you have access to it, you don't necessarily need to own it. And that's her question about going to the gym. However, it doesn't mean that having your own gym at home is not preferable to you. And so, yes, it's true that if you buy something, it might actually prevent a connection. Or sometimes the things you buy, sometimes the things you own, like that guitar on Rob Bell's wall, you know what? That actually enhances his connection because a friend comes over and Rob owns the thing, but his friends get to possess that thing for that moment. We got a lot more to talk about. Malabama, what do you got for us first?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hi, fellow minimalists. This is Friederike from Hamburg, Germany. I have a minimalist tip for new parents who don't want to spend a lot of money on expensive nursery furniture. Instead of a classic changing table, I simply bought a height-adjustable desk and put a small shelf underneath it. I now have a changing table that I can use as a tall mom without getting back pain. And the best thing is that we can use the table as a desk later on. Please keep doing what you're doing. Much love from Germany.
All right, y'all. We'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 429, which includes answers to a bunch more questions like, how do I deal with the judgment that I receive from family, friends, and coworkers when they see me decluttering my life? What do I do with the shame that I'm carrying from my past mistakes? How do we let go of bad memories so we can live more fully in the present moment? Plus, a million more questions and simple living segments, including a minimalist home tour, a tiny cabin in the woods. Also, the added value segment this week on the private podcast. I think all of us were tearing up.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Plus, much more of less. Visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You also get access to all of our private podcast archives, all of our archives, in fact, all the way back to episode number 1. Way back in 2015. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. And that is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.